Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting this evening. And I'd like to recognize their unique contribution to our environmental and cultural heritage, past, present, and future. And I'd like to extend my deepest respect to all First Nations people in attendance here this evening. Well, welcome everybody to tonight's Provocations public lecture, co-hosted by the Royal Society of New South Wales Weston branch and Charles Sturt University. My name's Mark Evans, and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research here at Charles Sturt and your host for this evening. This event has both a face-to-face and an online audience, so a very warm welcome to both audiences. We'll also be using Slido to elicit questions for our speaker. So please use the QR code in the frame behind me if you have a question. Now, Provocations is a series of public lectures, panel discussions, and blogs written by prominent thinkers that seek to address some of the significant challenges confronting Australia and the world to enable progress. Most of the problems that we focus on in this series are regional problems, but as you'll see tonight, they have global reach. So I would like to take this opportunity to direct you to the Provocations blog at Provocations, https://provocations.csu.edu.au. It has the byline, Shared Wisdom for Solving the Problems of Today and Tomorrow. And there you'll find a series of provocations aimed at challenging orthodox thinking, written by provocateurs Stan Grant Jr., Clive Hamilton, Sharon McLeod, Wayne Hudson, Lee Baumgartner, Ghana Pogrebna, Shamsi Shukafei, Patrick Walsh, and many others. And on each topic, we encourage reasoned online engagement and debate. This evening's lecture will further strengthen our range of provocations. Tonight, Professor Leslie Weston will address the topic, Adapting to Change, Invasive Plants and Pests Take Up the Challenge. By way of introduction, Professor Weston is Charles Sturt University's first scientist to be honoured as a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science. This ranks Professor Weston amongst the nation's most distinguished scientists based on peer election for groundbreaking research. Leslie was born in Buffalo, New York, and has lived and worked in different parts of the USA, including New York, Michigan, and Kentucky, and internationally in Dijon, France. She came to Wagga Wagga in 2008, after she was awarded a BioFirst New South Wales Research Fellowship. Her area of expertise is in crop protection, focusing on the study of plant biochemistry through understanding the mechanisms of plant interactions with other plants, pests, and fauna, including grazing livestock. She's also a very highly successful breeder of an extremely evolved species of dog. the basset hound. Originally bred for the purpose of hunting hare, their sense of smell and ability to ground scent is second only to the bloodhound. Their temperament is described as loyal, friendly, affectionate, and tenacious, a little bit like Leslie. We are very, very proud to host Professor Weston's research here at Charles Sturt. Everyone, I give you Professor Leslie Weston.
Thank you, Mark, for the very nice introduction. I'm really pleased to say the bassets are doing well, too. And tonight, I've been thinking about this presentation for a while, and having just had a recent trip back home for our daughter's wedding, I'm going to be combining an approach to talk a bit about what's happening in the US, where I used to manage and work with quite a few invasive species of plants, and also what's going on in some of my research here in Australia as well. And we'll compare and contrast a bit of this as we go through the presentation. So thank you for the introduction. So this picture this evening evokes a number of emotions for me. I look at it and think it's overwhelming. I also look at it and it makes me sad, and it also makes me angry. And then I look at it from an artistic perspective and say it's interesting. But this particular slide was taken more recently, and it's a species that's present both here in Australia as well as in the United States, where it's a major problem. And you can see that this particular plant is smothering trees, shrubs, and anything growing on the ground surface. I look at this picture and I'm a bit sad because this species wasn't present when I was a child growing up in New York State, and today it's ranged throughout southern New York State, all the way through the eastern and southern states of the US, spread through Texas, and it's now in Oregon and Washington State as well. And I look at this and it makes me angry because when it's not managed, the land value here from an economic perspective is relatively worthless. This used to be a dairy farm, and it was productive until it went out of production and invasive species came in particular this species. And now, because of lack of management, you couldn't sell this property if you tried. And so it also makes me sad in that, from the standpoint of mechanistic research, it's been exceptionally hard to gain funding to understand more about the physiology, biochemistry, and mechanisms of invasion success for many of these species, despite the fact that they have such important economic consequences for land managers, landholders, people living in the community, and producers. And so I'll start my presentation with this, and that sets a bit of the tone, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about where I grew up. So I'm from New York State. I'm from upstate New York, which is different than New York City and Long Island. I lived outside of Buffalo, and you can see New York State is a fairly large state. It's got 39 million people, inhabitants, but most of them are concentrated around New York City and Long Island, and the rest of the state is highly productive in terms of horticulture, agronomy production, ornamentals, landscape and turf, and forestry. It contains the largest natural preserve in North and South America, known as the Adirondacks. You might be familiar with that as a place where Lake Placid held some of the first Winter Olympics, and still manages to maintain some pristine lakes and streams. The St. Lawrence Seaway runs through New York, and we have ample water resources in this state. as well as mosquitoes. And New York itself has a very large and thriving industry for agricultural production. And I was fortunate enough to work there, not only as a student, but also as an employee of Cornell University, where for 10 years I managed landscape, turf, ornamentals, and roadside vegetation. So I've been all over as a cooperative extension agent, working in every county, besides a researcher, and so I was really familiar with the roads and places. My family started me interested in horticulture, mainly because they managed a commercial nursery, market garden, and eventually a very large retail garden center. And they lived in Gardenville, which is just outside of Buffalo. They started this in the 1930s during the Depression, when my grandfather bought a piece of land, invested with my great uncle, started a market garden, and eventually developed floriculture, ornamentals, vegetables, fruit, and finally nursery crops. And this, in the 70s and 80s, became the region's largest landscape and production nursery, and ranged in sales from Canada through central New York State. So I grew up with a background in plant biology and worked with my grandfather breeding, propagating, and also helping on weekends with my cousins working in the industry. And I decided to continue on. One of the things that's really interesting is that in the ornamentals industry, we have access to many invasive plants because ornamentals themselves are one aspect of how plants can be transported, propagated, and used for their appearance, but many of our invasive species have started out their careers as ornamentals, and when introduced from one place to the next, became readily invasive. And as I looked at that picture, and I recently traveled across New York State, I really spent some time thinking about invasive weed species, and you'll see why. The invasive plants that we categorize as invasive have dramatically increased in numbers, especially in the last 150 years. And over the last 500, we see more and more becoming invasive as they're transported and changed from their native range to introduced ranges. Why this is? Well, mainly because global transport and trade has occurred with increasing proximity and the ability to be transported rapidly and easily. So with trade, we move things around. We also have encountered a changing climate. Population is expanding in some places and contracting in others. So this definitely impacts land management and land use. So when we have changes in terms of disturbance or lack of management, we see invasives arise. We also know that the evolution of competitive traits can cause invasion success. And these include plant traits such as stress tolerance, the ability to fix nitrogen, the development of polyploidy or other genomic traits that are altered through hybridization, and also the use or employment of plant defense strategies like novel weapons or chemicals that impact their success or performance. Natural selection also, over a period of time, as invasives are introduced to an area and then become more prominent, also allows them to become more successful over time in some cases, and we'll see this. Now, an example of an ornamental that's been widely propagated and still is, but is definitely an invasive species, are the buddleias. These are known as butterfly bushes, and we see them commonly as perennials in the landscape. They're a problem because of the amount of seed that they produce. They generate new seedlings every year. And they spread, they're easily germinated, and they can spread in the landscape, and they can also reproduce vegetatively, becoming large and have the ability to suppress the growth of other annuals or perennials within the landscape itself. I worked for a number of years with a very prominent plant breeder named Peter Padaris. Peter focused on buddleias, and one of the things we did is trial both sterile and semi-sterile cultivars or dwarf hybrids to try to make these less problematic in the landscape because they are exceptionally attractive. A question that I often get asked in my field, which involves weed science, is what's the worst invasive plant? And I would say that's really difficult to say, but in any particular landscape, it depends on the setting, the use, the impact on economics, and also the impact on social system. And the estimated cost of invasives in general is about $21 billion per year in the United States, and in Australia, it's estimated to be more likely about $5 billion a year. But in total, over the last 100 years, we would say we've spent over trillions of dollars to try to manage them. The worst invasive plant is difficult to say. Lantana is an example in this picture because it's prevalent across the world as an invasive species on nearly every continent except Antarctica. So from that perspective, it's widespread. It might be attractive, but it causes a lot of problems at the same time. So I mentioned natural selection as an important process which results in the adaptive evolution of useful traits over a period of time. And just like Charles Darwin proposed natural selection resulting in the development of organisms and with interesting evolutionary patterns and characteristics, the same thing happens in plants. So we could say that invasive plants have the ability to adapt to new environments and even behave like native species because of their ability to be altered over a period of time in their newly introduced area. And we can also say, because of the research that's been conducted, that the behavior of invasive plant species changes over time. That is, plants of the same species act differently if they arrive in the same or new environments at different times. And invasives typically evolve the development of competitive traits over time, resulting in their ability to use local resources in a better manner to their best advantage. And successful invaders, and as you'll see in my talk, also have numerous competitive traits, not just one or two. So typically, if we think about an invasive species, we think about the process and how they get to one place or another. And generally, they're transported there. They are moved either by humans, animals, wind, water, rain, or a variety of methods to get to a particular location. Then they have to somehow colonize or form a colony or population, which eventually will become established, hopefully in this case to become invasive, well established. But that establishment process can take a long period of time. They have a latent period where the population just sits, evolves, and eventually becomes successful. That latent period can be a matter of months or years, or it can be as long as 500 to 1,000 years. It depends on the species and the situation. But the landscape spread that occurs as a result of invasion success is really something to behold when a species is truly successful. And so going back to that first picture, what is that plant? That plant was kudzu vine, and this is an invasive species that prefers disturbed sites, and it prefers higher rainfall, it prefers warmer temperatures, and it prefers the ability to establish in well-drained, fairly fertile soils. As Australia has all of these, it's also problematic in Australia, but not to the extent it is in the United States. This particular plant grows up to 30 centimeters a day. The vines can be hundreds of feet long in a period of years. It's a perennial. It reproduces both sexually and asexually by tubers, and it's very difficult to eradicate, but essentially it smothers out its competition. And in this case, these pictures were taken in downstate New York, where this was not previously an invader. It has an interesting history, though, and like other ornamentals, this one came by not accidental introduction, but by deliberate introduction. And in 1876, this was the 100th year anniversary of the creation of the US, or our centennial. We had a huge celebration in Philadelphia, and what arrived and was one of the most popular exhibits was the kudzu vine from Japan. And this particular exhibit was interesting because it was cultivated for a period of months during the exhibition, and people could actually track its growth. It grew that fast. They were interested in it because it was high protein food source. It could be used as a forage, but they were really interested in it because it was able to tolerate a variety of conditions and could be used to grow in shade. And in the Deep South, people wanted a plant to put on their verandas that would be successful as a shade plant. So in the 1880s, it was established all over the southern US. And at that particular point in time, it was on verandas, on trellises, and it was contained. And it grew very successfully. From this point, it spread throughout the southern United States and now is in 38 different states across the United States. In Australia, it's present from the Northern Territory, and it's down through southern Queensland, in New South Wales, and in a variety of sites that are being actively managed or screened for particular growth. And it's a concern because it is a noxious weed, and DAF biosecurity in Queensland is particularly careful in watching how it's progressing and trying to eliminate its establishment. In the US, though, it was introduced, and from 1890 to 1950, it was propagated, and it was planted on millions, literally millions of acres of land as a fodder and food source for livestock. Unfortunately, we didn't realize the ramifications for its ability to invade and its difficulty in managing it once it has invaded. So this particular invasive prefers high rainfall, disturbed sites, but once it established, and we've from 1950 onwards realized the problem, it now has annual losses of about up to $500 million a year in loss of land production in the US. It also adversely affects native plants and species or habitats for wildlife. It also increases the ability to mineralize or nitrify. As it takes up nitrogen and decomposes, we have higher nitrification rates. And because it actually works in the nitrogen cycle, it contributes to ozone pollution by doubling soil emissions of nitric oxide. And so that's really interesting. In the US, if you ask which legume species fixes the most nitrogen per year, the kudzu vine, by far. So it is able, because of these traits, to actively grow and reproduce and continually generate these tubers to allow it to clonally propagate. It also endangers native communities, rare and endangered plants, and currently is found in a variety of habitats and is now becoming more and more drought tolerant as it's adapted to drier conditions. In Australia, I became really interested in invasive species from the first month I joined staff here. And over the last few years, I'd been asked to develop a research chapter for a book on perspectives on plant invasion. And our chapter was a historical perspective on plant invasion in Australia. And I was lucky enough to work with Paul Downey from the University of Canberra, a well-known ecologist who had a lot of history in Australia and helped me write this particular chapter along with my team. And we found that in Australia, there are several different and important perspectives that influence invasion success. Australian separation from land masses has resulted in a really rare and unique group of Australia flora in relative isolation from other areas of the world for many, many years, millions of years. The colonization, though, of Australia in the 1700s, 230 years ago, marked the beginning of a huge mass invasion of alien plants and animal species from other continents. And right from that point, things changed in Australia. So these mass invasions have had a profound effect on the Australian landscape and also the native species that these landscapes supported. But interestingly, if you look at plant invasion in Australia, it's really been influenced not just by short-term changes in climate or land use patterns or population movement, but by longer-term climate trends, because the Australian climate and continental divide itself has really influenced what's happening here. Sea levels in Australia have risen and fallen for 20 million years, and they're still doing that over time, which has influenced our plant populations. The Great Dividing Range here has also been present for greater than 20 million years, and it's a natural barrier which prevents migration in some ways of plants. The limited volcanic activity we've had for the past 20 million years have influenced what we can grow and what invades successfully, and also the volcanic soils. And the periods of really colder and wetter climatic extremes, glacial cycling, and seismic activity have also really impacted the fauna and flora that we have here in Australia. So it's important to think about the longer-term consequences. But if we look at Australia's invaders, we have about 3,200 species of plants that have been introduced to Australia. Similar number in upstate and central New York as well. Most of these are not invasive, but about 500 or 15% of them are noxious, okay? And they require significant management because of their noxious properties. Numerous biocontrols have been attempted and released over a period of time, both in New York State for some of these and also Australia. And Australia's had quite a bit of success with several of these species. But over time in Australia, which differs from New York State, we have more significant loss of our native species. And Australian native species are being lost at an ever-increasing rate. So we have over 60 plant species that are extinct since the period of time when they've been monitored, and now 1,200 of them are at risk, and that's increasing in numbers every year. So the invasives, the land management, and changing climate have all impacted Australian natives as well as the invasive species that are here. So if we look at other factors that are influencing our invasives, it has a lot to do with their genetics, their ability to hybridize, whether they form polyploids over a period of time like various ornamentals and crop species do, but understanding how this works and the current impacts on invasion potential is important. And one of the things we'd like to be able to do is use the invasion success characteristics of Australian and other species that are invasive and try to improve crop competitiveness as well. So there are some positives we can gain from understanding more about invasive species and their ability to successfully adapt. So just a few weeks ago, as many of you know, I was back home from my daughter's wedding, and I spent a lot of time driving, and I also spent a lot of time looking at upstate New York and what's been happening over the past 16 years. I've only been home a few times since I left, and I was in for a big shock. This particular plant is Japanese knotweed, and when I left, it was present in patchy distributions. It was starting to be problematic along roadsides, but now it's everywhere from southern New York State all the way up to the Adirondacks. And I was shocked to see it because we spent a lot of time developing recommendations and for the ability to manage it successfully. It's also a problem here in Australia. This is a species that's located in at least 3 states across the south, including Tasmania. And we have 3 species of knotweeds that are declared as prohibited weeds, particularly problematic around Victoria. And it is present primarily as Japanese knotweed or Reinutria japonica, but there are another species and another hybrid also present. So these aren't nearly as competitive as those that we encounter in upstate New York, and we're not really sure why, but it's interesting to speculate. Obviously, the climate, soil, and other factors are different. In this particular case, these plants reproduce mainly clonally by rhizomes and root pieces, but I actually studied populations along the roadsides in New York, and using molecular techniques and markers, I was able to show that each cluster of plants establishes as a mixture usually, and amongst the mixtures there in clusters of plants, there was a variety of genotypes or biotypes that represented genetic diversity. And so they were not identical, which suggested that sexually reproductive plants were active, and we've now found more evidence for that across the northern US. So not only do we have clonal or vegetative production where all plants are the same, we also see sexual production as well. Management of this species is really difficult. These rhizome pieces go down 4 meters in depth, up to 4 meters, usually 1 meter to 2. Within a few years, they're down to a depth of up to 1.5 meters. They can be up to 10 feet tall. I drove on the roadsides and I saw that it wasn't even possible to see certain houses behind these knotweeds establishing in the front. What's happening here is that the Department of Transportation in counties is no longer funding roadside weed management. And while they're not mowing as actively, they're also not spraying with herbicides as actively. And if they don't have volunteers actually cleaning this up, or homeowners don't, then these plants establish, and there's almost no way to get rid of them once they establish. So if you want to establish that, if you want to control them, one way is to use herbicides, and that does work, but only when plants are established as young plants in small clusters. And you have to actually inject these systemic herbicides in the actual stem of these. Knotweed psyllid is a biocontrol that's been introduced, and this has occurred in the last 2 years. One of my colleagues at Cornell, Bern Blasi, assisted with its introduction, and we're now awaiting to see if there's any possibility for success in management. This larvae of this particular the psyllid and its feeding mouth parts actually start to damage the plant itself. and cause these stems to fall over and become injured over a period of time. When I went to my daughter's wedding, I also spent quite a bit of time traveling across upstate New York. And what struck me again was the availability of fresh water, quiet ponds, pools, streams, rivers that flow, but sometimes very gently flowing. And this also allows invasive species to propagate, particularly those that require large amounts of soil moisture to be present. Along all the roadsides in upstate New York and the Hudson Valley, though, I was really, really surprised to see how much weed growth has occurred. Because again, in the last 2 years, they've been exceptionally wet and had higher than average rainfall events in the summer. Again, similar to some of the climatic changes that we've seen here in Australia. So this has allowed invasives to actually propagate more successfully, especially if they're not managed along roadsides. I then, from the wedding, traveled to visit a group of friends, and they lived right across the border in Connecticut, another lake region, and they have a house on Candlewood Lake. And one of the first things we started talking about was the quality of water and how things were going in the lake in terms of its health. And these are pictures that I've actually taken on the lake. You know, it's very attractive. It's relatively still water. This is a high nutrient lake because it gets a lot of rainfall, which allows movement of nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, into the lake. So relatively high availability of nutrients, which can also support invasive weed growth. And one of my friends, Ellen, said, well, we really had a bad outbreak of Eurasian milfoil. And I looked and I said, but I don't see any plants now. And she said, well, I'll tell you the story. And so in this particular case, Eurasian milfoil is an invasive species, aquatic. It's a plant that actively photosynthesizes, and it forms really deep and dense mats of the milfoil itself that suppress other plants from growing, and it can cause real problems becoming entangled in boats, but also limiting fish populations from successfully developing. And it can also generate, as it decomposes, all sorts of changes in available biological oxygen. So that causes problems over time and suppresses native plants and species as well. This particular plant is prevalent globally. It's present as a problem in at least 57 to 60 countries. It's been propagated through the aquarium industry, and so you used to get this. If you bought an aquarium, you'd see this on sale in various pet stores, and you may have seen this here locally as well. Now it's banned in trade in many countries, but is still available in others. It reproduces primarily vegetatively, and this dense mats limit the growth of natives, and it just reproduces by slips. It's also capable of producing sexually, and it can hybridize with other species. So in northern the United States, it hybridizes, and these hybrids have now spread throughout all the lakes in Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin as well. Managing it can be a problem. You can use herbicides, but a lot of people, because of the biomass, are actually trying to harvest this mechanically in water. So they have mowers and collectors in lakes that actually work to pull it out in really heavily infested areas. And biocontrols are also an option, but haven't proven totally successful in ridding it. One of the things we've noticed, though, as you travel into the lakes region in upstate New York and Connecticut, is that environmental conservation policy is everywhere. As you travel, you see these signs and regulations in front of lake areas, in front of docks, in front of areas where you launch boats. There's a lot of regulations and fines, and you have to be exceptionally careful now at what you do with your boat in terms of managing this so you don't introduce invasive species. Huge fines for introducing invaders or not managing the boat itself or cleaning it in between use. And at various docking points, you'll actually see inspectors. In some states, they have over 1,000 inspectors working in very active areas to inspect and monitor boats now for invasive species. And these can include plants as well as animals. But back to the story in Connecticut, I didn't see any Eurasian milfoil. In fact, I didn't see any plants. And that's because they decided to use grass carp to try to work as a biocontrol. Carp, as you know, like to eat plants, and they have a passion for eating Eurasian milfoil. So in this particular instance, they introduced hundreds of young grass carp, which were supposed to be sterile. They're not sure they were sterile because the population seemed to increase in numbers very exponentially, and the carp grew very well. But what happened is they ate every plant in the lake, including native plants as well. So at this particular point in time, they're doing their best to try to rid the lake of carp. And this just shows that if you don't really know enough about the biocontrol agent you introduce, you can create more problems than you solve. But the real problem is if you have no plants in a particular lake, you have sedimentation problems, you have problems with oxygen demand and the availability of protective areas for your natives, including fish. So real problems going on with the lake. Seems to try to being solved, but a lot of volunteers working in this from this standpoint. Now, one of the things I tried to do when I came to Australia was try to develop molecular approaches to study weed identification and population genetics. And we've been successful in employing some of these, and they've helped us try to understand some of the dynamics of what's going on in Australian species. And I'll just give you a couple examples before we finish up this evening. Here in Australia, one of the first species I came across when riding my horse, when I first moved here, was these melons. And they were called camel melons by my colleagues at the university. One of them we've identified as Citrullus lanatus, which was known as camel melon. The other, Cucumis myriocarpus, which was known as prickly paddy melon. Depending on where you live, you call them paddy or camel melons. This is an interesting one because they were introduced in Australia with movement through the camel route. And the story is, historically, that the saddles on these camels were actually packed with the seeds of these melons. The camel ears came from Pakistan and Afghanistan, where these melons were prevalent and were grown, sometimes for medicinal purposes. And when the saddles came over, they actually burst and spread seeds. People also said that perhaps these camels ate the melons as food sources, but they're very bitter, so that's not actually probably what happened. But if you look at the actual routes where camel movement occurred, the distribution in Australia actually mimics those routes. They would be moving from southern Australia up to the Northern Territory and across through Queensland, and that's where we see the largest distributions today. Interestingly, when we did molecular studies and we collected many populations across Australia, both regionally and up into the Northern Territory and WA, we saw that they have complex seed dormancy attributes. So their dormancy allows these seedlings, their seeds, to stay viable for a period of up to 5 to 10 years when dry. And that contributes to their ability to invade over a period of time. These species germinate with flushes of moisture, and they have a lot of morphological variation. But when we looked at their genetic diversity, it's very limited. And so we evaluated their taxonomy using extensive DNA sequence analysis and various markers at multi-loci. And interestingly, we found that this particular species was not correctly categorized. And working with the Australian National Herbarium, we were able to rename camel melon as Citrullus lanatus variety citroides, not lanatus, and it's actually a different melon than the cultivated watermelon. And so sometimes it's extremely helpful to be able to use these techniques for identification purposes. And because it's a different melon with different phenotype and characteristics, it also requires a different action in terms of its management. The last species, and one of them I'd like to mention, is hairy panic grass, and I think most of you have seen this regionally here. You know this, and we call it hairy panic grass. It's also known as witchgrass. Some people call it tumbleweed, but this particular grass is really problematic in terms of its movement in late summer, as it accumulates against fences, roadsides, and various structures. In some places, it's difficult to get in and out of your house because it accumulates in front of the doors. It's also a species which is toxic, or a variety of species. There's more than one panic grass in this region. And it's toxic because of the steroidal saponins it produces, which cause serious liver damage in grazing livestock when ingested in high quantities. It's an interesting species in that this toxicity results in photosensitization. So if the liver is actually clinically impacted, then photosensitization to grazing livestock can occur in areas where they're not covered with hair or with wool. And photosensitization occurs when UV irradiation hits the livestock and they possess these saponins, steroidal saponins, which then react, and secondary photosensitization occurs because of liver damage. And so you can see in this case that this particular sheep has passed away. The young ones end up with swollen and weepy eyelids and mouth parts, and then they're not able to eat. They have decreased growth rates and production. They can get jaundiced, and at the very worst case, they have dysfunctional liver and they die. So this is a real problem as this species has spread. It's interesting in that panic grasses have moved here generally from South Australia, and a number of them were introduced as possible species for grazing, introduction in pastures to improve the quality and protein feed source on offer for grazing sheep in particular. And we see them move now at a rate of up to 100 kilometers a year northeast by wind and also water. We see them produce seed in great abundance. And the main reason that we're seeing more of them in this region is that we've switched from conservation tillage, from tillage to no tillage, and their seed accumulates on the surface of the soil when we don't till, and therefore they germinate in high abundance in summer fallows. So after the crops are harvested, this is a weed that's very prevalent. In fact, it's one of our #1 most prevalent weeds in cereal grain production and canola. It's also super drought tolerant, and we see a complex of these panic species. So they've been moving gradually by wind upwards through the north and to the east, to the point now that they're at least to Dubbo, and I've seen their incidence increase generally in the last 12 years. But prior to my arrival, this was not a species that was prevalent or even common. We did a series of studies with a PhD student, Yuchi Chen, and also our CSIRO National Herbarium, And we were able to successfully identify 8 species that were prevalent in this region, Panicum species, and we were able to use molecular techniques, sequence analysis, to determine that the main culprit here was not hairy panic or witchgrass, but was Hillman's panic grass. And this was a grass that was cultivated in Texas, introduced here in the early 1900s as a potential rangeland or grass species, but it's escaped and has become really prevalent in this region, still moving northward. So an interesting story, and one that we can use to be able to then hopefully use these techniques to be able to identify other grass species of lesser significance or lesser information at this point. The genomes of these species also differ in size, so the native species generally have a smaller genome size, but this particular species also smaller. We were able now to characterize the steroidal saponins present in these, and because we've been successfully able to detect and identify them, we can now use this information to hopefully manage these species better and determine what environmental impacts have in terms of climate upon their toxicity over a period of time. One of the management practices we're recommending is taking younger livestock off pastures and grazing only older sheep and cattle, which are more tolerant to this particular situation. And the last example I'd like to give tonight is that of Patterson's curse. This is a species near and dear to my heart because we obtain significant amounts of funding from the Australian Research Council to investigate not only its movement, but its genetics and also its chemistry. And it's one that's adapted very well to the Australian climate. And we estimate now that there are over 3 million acres or hectares which are infested by Patterson's curse in this particular region, but in all of Australia, up to 30 million hectares. And again, this is a plant that also causes toxicity, in this case because of the presence of pyrrolizidine alkaloids. It's an invasive pest. The plants also produce defense metabolites to protect themselves, and it's been very successful in outcompeting native pastures and vegetation. This particular weed has come to us from the Iberian Peninsula in Andalusia. It reproduces sexually. It has very high genetic diversity typically, but interestingly, it's extremely drought resistant. And we've found these plants in a variety of locations across New South Wales and Victoria, but as far north as in White Cliffs and also in variety of desert locations, still subsisting and reproducing because of their drought tolerance. One of the things we discovered about Patterson's curse is that its defense metabolites help to protect the plant. In this case, the chaconins it produces are bright red in color. They're herbicidal, antibacterial, antifungal. They're actually used for wound healing in Asian medicine, but in this case, they also help to act as a chemical glove to protect the plants that establish in the Australian climate against pathogens, bacteria, nematodes, and other pests. And they're also herbicidal in that they can act to help suppress germinating weeds nearby. So very interesting chemistry. In the foliage, though, this is where the pyrrolizidine alkaloids reside, and the foliage and roots produce these hepatotoxic alkaloids that then impact livestock health and growth over a period of time. Most of the alkaloids are present in highest concentration in the rosettes or the young form of these plants rather than the flowering plants. So we sampled plants from all over the world, and interestingly, we found that the greatest genetic diversity after sequence analysis was performed occurred both in Australia as well as in South Africa. And this genetic diversity resulted in different biotypes and potentially also helps explain the ability of Australia and South Africa to host this invasive species most effectively, and may contribute to its ability to also adapt to really stressful climates here. So interestingly, when we've monitored the introduction of Patterson's curse and studied its genetics, we were able to determine that the plant itself came from Iberian Peninsula and moved across the continent to China, generally by land transport. And with the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the transportation actually ceased. Boat traffic brought the actual plant to South Africa, and from South Africa it eventually came after the 1700s to Australia with the first sheep that migrated. So at this particular point in time, I'm just going to finish up my presentation with a final few thoughts, both on Australian and other globally important native invasive species, and just say that one of the things that we need to do to try to manage these species more effectively is gain a larger amount of information about them. And in order to do this, it's extremely helpful to use molecular techniques. The ability for us to study these plants using plant genomics is an evolving technology. And right now, we've only sequenced the genomes for 30 different weed species in the world at this point. And so many of these invasives have not yet been studied from a genomic perspective. If we could spend more time and obtain funding to sequence these genomes, not only would we be able to harness other appropriate techniques to understand their competitive traits and their ability to be successful, but we might also be able to explain their mechanisms of invasion more effectively and also use some of their traits to incorporate in other species such as crop plants or ornamentals of interest. So with that, I'm going to close and say that we've also seen Australia be very successful in its biocontrol efforts. Prickly pear has been probably one of our best successes, but we have opportunities for others, provided we gain the funding. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge my funding agencies, Meat and Livestock Australia, the Australian Research Council, Grain Research and Development Corporation, our research institutes, and a variety of the departments, including DAF and the Agriculture Department here in Australia. And I'm thankful that we've been able to do the work that we have. So with that, I'm also happy to take any questions.